The Graphic Histories Podcast.
I got bit by a radioactive bug. I tried an experimental drug. Went up for a stroll on a gamma testing range. I found an enchanted hurricane. I made a serum that made me small. I modified the serum so it would make me tall. Radioactive isotope in my eyes. Dying alien helped me accessorize. I gained the proportion and strength of a spider. Now I'm invincible and I can fly. I lost my sight, my other senses were heightened. I'm gonna put on my pajamas and go fight crime.
Hey there and welcome to the Graphic Histories Podcast. My name is André and Jenn, your podcast host. Big thanks to Uka the Mock for our theme song, Superpowers. And big thanks to you, gentle listener, for tuning in once again. Today's guest is Jennifer Lee Rossman, a writer. They're an author of several books as well as short stories, poetry, and various other things. We don't usually have a lot of straight-up writers on the show, not because I don't want them on, just because sometimes, we get who we can get. And I was lucky enough for Chris Murphy, who was a friend of the show and involved with the United Federation of Podcasts, of which we are a proud member, point me in the direction of Jen, and I got to have a great conversation with them. Part of the show is learning about the ways of life of other folks, a lot of artists and writers have similar origin stories, if you will, but the way they look at life or the way they've processed the experiences they've had, all those sort of things make them unique. And that's part of the fun of this show, is to get insight into life experience of artistic types. And that was sort of the impetus for me for doing this to begin with. Jennifer has a unique origin story in that they were born with muscular dystrophy. So because of that, they've had a very different upbringing than what most people would be familiar with. So I was very keen to talk with them about that and about the creative process and about how they came to be the creative force that they are today. And I was very lucky that they were able to pop in and have a chat with me about that. The conversation is just a tad shorter than normal, mostly because we had some issues with the feed at the end, but it's fine. I think we got the whole conversation in there. And it was a great chat, and I'm very thankful to Jen for coming on. So I hope they're listening, and I hope they're happy with the outcome. As all the people that come on the show. I don't do these sort of shows to be a sort of gotcha sort of interview or anything like that. I just do it to get insight into the creative process I mentioned. And Jen was very free with their time, and I was very lucky to have them on the show. So things going on in my life, thankfully. I am getting slightly more freer in the coming weeks as the dinner theater I am is drawing to a close. I do talk in the conversation with Jen about how I've been sort of plagued by this song, Hungry Eyes, which is sung in the dinner theater, but for some reason I keep hearing every single place I go. I don't necessarily believe in a force, changing events, especially dictating them around my life, but it certainly seems like somebody wants me to hear that song an awful lot. And maybe it's likely just because it's a popular song and it's one that I probably never paid attention to before until I heard it every night in the dinner theater. So, that is what's been going on there. It's always a fun event. It's always, creatively, I wouldn't call dinner theater the most fulfilling creatively, as far as I enjoy doing it. I love the people that are involved with it. It's a lot of fun. But it's light fare, which is designed purely to entertain, and there isn't a lot of deeper meat on the bones there as an actor that you really get to explore. So it's a lot of fun. It's a nice escapism for the folks that come, and it's a great time. And if I didn't enjoy it, I wouldn't keep doing it. But I am excited to have some free time back and be a little less pressed for time, as time is a very valuable commodity in my life, as I'm a very busy person. But speaking of time, maybe I shouldn't waste yours anymore. Maybe I shouldn't tell you about me. Maybe we should just get into my conversation with Jen Rossman.
I'm from Binghamton, New York.
Oh, really? Interesting. Well,
Yeah.
You're not too far off, just down the coast.
Where are you from?
Nova Scotia.
Huh.
Yeah, so just a little further up. Lately I've had quite a few folks that are kind of in the on the East Coast, which is nice. So people can relate to the weather out here. So how's it been down there?
Yeah.
Weather.
Haven't been days because my wheelchair was getting repaired, but all the staff at my group home have been complaining that it keeps changing.
Are you from New York originally? Like, were you born there?
Yeah, I was born in Cooperstown and then lived in Oneonta, which is overflow for the Baseball Hall of Fame, basically.
No.
It's like when you come for baseball stuff and you can't stay in Cooperstown, you go to Oneonta and mess with the locals there because we hated the tourists. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I mean, let's get into it. So, I mean, you're very open on your, sort of the stuff I've read about you just online about your condition and everything like that. So, when was it something like, were you born with this, or did it come about as you got a little older?
So I was born with spinal muscular atrophy,
Mhm.
which is a kind of muscular dystrophy, and basically we all have two of the genes for it, and if both parents pass down a broken one, the child is disabled.
Mm.
Um, when I was born, no one noticed because like it didn't affect me then, but as I got older, it was like, oh, Jen is moving their legs, not really walking anywhere in the baby walker.
Mm.
So it was 9 months old that I was diagnosed.
Wow. And I mean, obviously, for the frame of reference for folks listening or tuning in that don't have that sort of, or anyone in their life that may suffer from a similar disability. Um, like, what was, I guess, how was life growing up in that situation? It must have been probably pretty difficult.
So I feel like I was kind of lucky in that I never could walk, so I didn't have anything to lose.
Mm.
So I just grew up using a wheelchair, and that was my normal. Um, so basically, like, my brain works and my muscles work, but they don't communicate well.
Hmm.
So like I can move my arms, but not all of the signal is getting through, so I'm not moving it hard. It's like
Hmm.
I can pick up my arm, I can't pick up my arm carrying something.
Wow.
Uh, yeah.
So, I know you're a writer, which is very cool. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to get to read anything yet. Just because the nature of doing these interviews, sometimes they happen, the scheduling happens in such a way that I don't necessarily have as much time in between to especially with folks that have like full books, which I'm actually very excited to read the Intergalactic Freak Show. That one looks very interesting to me. So it's in my read pile. But was that like, as someone who was growing up without the ability to kind of do some of the more normal things that I guess folks can do, just like running around as kids and stuff, was books and reading like an escape for you, or is that just something that you found?
Um, yeah, so I never went to school like properly. I was homeschooled.
Hmm.
And even when I was homeschooled, I was kind of like on my own for studying things.
Hmm.
So I had a lot of free time, and I had no friends my age. Like, it was friends of my parent, or like children of my parents' friends. So I was just like assigned friends who were like 4 or 6 years older than me. So
Oh, that must have been fun.
yeah,
Uh,
that was good when, but once they were in high school and I was still watching Sesame Street and they didn't really care anymore about my interests,
mhm.
uh, yeah, I just started writing. And I I don't remember a time when I ever wasn't writing.
Mhm.
Uh, but I finally got like serious about submitting things. 2000, wait, 2016.
Really?
Yeah,
So you must have quite a collection up to that point.
yeah. The last time I counted it, there were 60 publications for short stories and a couple poems, and that was like a year ago that I counted. So
Oh, wow.
yeah,
So, were your folks supportive of you doing something in the writing field, as far as you know, seeking out that is a possible path of sort of an outlet for your creativity?
kind of. It was more like, hey, you're not bothering us. Do your thing. Don't bother us thing. If you get famous, buy us a house kind of thing.
It's a nice attitude. I'll take
Yeah.
that. That's better than not. What do your folks do?
My mother stayed at home to take care of me,
Mm.
and my father had used car salesman when I was very little, and then various like, hey, I'm going to do this for 6 months because I'm interested in it now, kind of thing. I
Nah.
know where I got my attention deficit disorder from, I think. Uh,
Yeah, I like hearing stories about creative types when you chat with folks, because it seems like there's like anybody, there's a mismatch of stories that are all over the place. But I like the ones where it's like dad was some kind of dad or mom was some kind of like a fun creative type that maybe doesn't necessarily do the art thing, but just is like all over the map because
yeah.
various interests and doing various things. Like I'm kind of like I don't know if I would say I have any sort of ADHD or anything like that, but I've always been very drawn to a lot of different things, and it's cool when you can somehow leverage that into a career, I guess, even if just for a little while. So sounds like your dad was one of those.
Yeah, like he sold kayaks for a while, um,
Awesome.
and like, worked for, I still don't know what he did for the military, but it was something boring in engineering. But
Okay.
he was upset it was during the Cold War, so technically he's not allowed to go to Russia because he might have information that they want. And he's like,
Oh,
I don't have information they want on it anymore, but I still can't go to Russia. And he's
interesting.
still upset about that.
Is it a dream of his to go to Russia? It's probably a good thing he can right now.
Not, yeah, it wasn't until he was told he couldn't.
Yeah. Oh, so he's one of those types, which I totally understand. It's I have one of those. A few friends like that are it's not an issue until you're told you can't do it, and then suddenly it's a big issue.
Right.
So what were you reading when you were when you were doing your studying and had all this extra time?
Um, so I was like very into I just totally blanked on what it was called. Well, like the first science fiction or fantasy things I read was probably Goosebumps.
Nice. Me
Um,
too.
and yeah, I think I read like every book on that shelf in the library, and it was like Goosebumps and also Babysitter's Club was on the same shelf for some
Hmm.
reason.
Yeah.
Like I think it was just like the same size they put together.
Yeah, it's probably the age group, right? Like it's around the
Yeah,
same bracket. So it's probably Goosebumps for the boys and Babysitter's Club for the girls, but that's probably
probably.
their thought reasoning. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, that's cool. Now, are you a horror fan in general? Like, it's Goosebumps. I was a massive fan of it as a kid, and I don't know if I could blame that for being why I'm such a big horror fan now. But I certainly could probably trace it back to that. I've certainly read all of them. I think I had all of them at one point. At one point, when I kind of got out of beyond the age of reading them, I sold them all. But there was a period where I was like super, super like every book that came out, I had. So you, the horror person?
Um, Not as much as science fiction fantasy, but I do like the Goosebumps kind of horror where it's scary but also completely ridiculous.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
like the sci-fi original movies, kind of horror movies. Like they are so bad, but I enjoy them so much. Like, um, like I
The right.
just watched the second Gremlins movie for the first time ever.
Oh, I love that. That's one of
And
my all-time favorite movies.
yeah, I've seen the first one, but I never saw the second one.
Hmm.
And it's just so like it's ridiculous and it shouldn't be scary, but like but these things keep breeding and they have wings now and they are too smart. It is
Yeah.
actually scary. It
Yeah.
shouldn't.
It's at a weird level. I'm a huge Gremlins fan. You can see I don't know if you can see it behind me. I have a couple of the models, and I have the flasher one from the first one there as well. And I think it's my cat's probably peeking in the door there. But
Oh,
that's one of them. There's three of them running around. That's Ripley. But
mm,
yeah, the Gremlins movies I love. Like, I'm a huge Joe Dante fan, the guy that did them, and
mm.
The first one is just such a fun little, low budget horror movie. And the second one, I guess they tried to get him to make another movie for years. Like they're like, the first one did well, please make another one. He's like, no, it's too much work, all the puppets, I don't want to do it. And then like a year would go by and they'd be like, come on, well, here's a bunch more money, please come back and do another one. He's like, no. And then like eventually they're like, here's a bunch more money, come back, you can do whatever you want. We have no input in the movie whatsoever. And that's when he said okay. And that's why the movie is so crazy. Like he just did what he wanted. It's almost like a cartoon, and it almost parodies itself for most of the movie, but it's so fun.
Yeah.
It's one of those movies that I feel like people don't
Have you
appreciate.
have you seen the Key and Peele sketch about making
Yeah.
Gremlins?
Yeah. Yes, and I love that sketch as well. And I actually listened to a podcast that Joe Dante's on. It's called the movies that made me. Him and a scriptwriter, they interview folks. It's more like they have people on that just talk about movies that inspired them or their top 10 movies of any type. And at one point, they brought that up about that Key and Peele sketch, and he said that it wasn't too far off. He said that sketch wasn't too far off from what really happened. Yeah. Which I thought was pretty funny. He obviously has a sense of humor about it, which is cool. Awesome. So, yeah, the sci-fi stuff. Were you like, because your stuff seems to have a bit of a comedic bend to it too. Were you a fan of like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and stuff like that sort of sci-fi funny stuff, or?
Yeah. So I was not really into sci-fi and fantasy that much when I was younger.
Mhm.
It was very specific what I was into. And I blame my mother for this because she got me into Spaceballs before she showed me Star Wars.
That's great.
I think it was a parody.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I guess that would be such a surreal way to watch that movie. Yeah.
So that's why I am the way I am.
I guess if you're submitted that movie as like I wouldn't say a serious movie, but not knowing that 90% of it is making fun of another property that you have no
Yeah.
no familiarity with. That's great. That's such a
Yeah,
wonderful way to experience that.
It's still a good movie if you have no idea what they're talking about.
Oh, it's hilarious. Even just for the general humor of it,
Yeah.
surrounded by
Yeah, like-
assholes.
Yeah, like I watched Star Wars and I'm like, oh, Jabba the Hutt, like Pizza the Hut. And my mom's like, oh no, I did this wrong.
Immediately realized her error.
Yeah.
That's cool. Wow. So I mean I don't really know many folks who haven't had many conversations with people that were homeschooled. I mean, obviously, I guess the nature of your life probably made things easier for your folks to do it in such a way. But do you feel like you missed some integral part of the social aspect, or did you feel like you kind of got that from your friends?
No, I missed out on a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
My mother got it in her head that if I got sick at all, I would die. So it was like very much, you're staying home because of germs. You're going to wash your hands every time you touch anything.
Mm.
Like, so I was very like isolated, and I thought I was fine because
Yeah.
I learned social television shows, and that is not a good way to learn social cues. So when so my mother got like worse about that as I got older, and she was like mentally and emotionally abusive. So when I finally left home at age 28, I went to a nursing home for a month before I moved to my group home, and I realized I have no idea what I'm doing here.
Mm.
Like I know how conversations are supposed to go because of TV and because of writing, but other people don't care about how conversations are supposed to go. They don't have the script. They're making it up as they go along.
Mhm.
And you're just supposed to figure that out.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow, that's
easy.
very interesting. Crazy. Do you ever watch are you into, as far as films go, do you ever watch like any movies like more European movies or movies like that? Like there are a lot of interesting movies that I was kind of like about that sort of idea, like kids that were sort of raised away from society and then sort of have to sort of integrate or try to figure out a way. Like there's a really interesting one by Yorgos Lanthimos called the guy that did Poor Things that came out this year, called Dogtooth. It was like his first movie, but it's about like kids that are raised by parents in a bunker that are sort of learn their social cues from what they can, but mostly are reliant on their parents. And their parents kind of gaslight them into thinking that the world outside is like destroyed because of a war or something, and that they can't go outside.
Mhm.
And it's a very interesting one, and one that always makes me kind of, just your story reminded me a little bit of, but it just sort of makes me think about these sort of situations that, some people find themselves in that you don't really realize and don't have the social cues, or at least to even know. I think that's very interesting about just learning it through media, because like script writing and TV, and they're all designed to be very snappy, the way people talk and the way conversations flow. And that's not realistic, especially if you enter the main world looking for that, right?
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, I've never heard of that movie. Sounds
Huh.
interesting.
Yeah, check it
But
out.
yeah. And the funny thing is that I've always been praised for my dialogue in my stories.
Mhm.
Like that's my main strength. And
Awesome.
then I get the real world, and that is my main weakness. I find that I like gravitate towards like characters like Seven of Nine from Voyager,
Mm,
who like raised by the Borg. Everything else is not us, and then suddenly she has no idea what she's doing,
mm,
and she needs like social lessons.
mm.
And like the staff at my nursing home kind of like inadvertently did that for me, where they
Aw.
were like kept putting me in situations where they were like, okay, you're friends with that other resident. Can you go get her for lunch so that we don't have to do it? Because she doesn't like us. She likes you. And then it would kind of put me into a situation where I have to like ask someone for something and negotiate. And a couple of the staff were really good about like helping me with that. And I think that like helped me figure out how to be a human.
Oh, wow. I feel like
Mm.
that's a great story in itself. Just as a film or a book. Someone in your situation, like this whole story sounds amazing. Wow. So I don't want to broach any sensitive subjects, but I'm guessing you don't have a relationship with your mom anymore because of all that stuff.
No.
No, that must be.
Um, eh, it's easier to not have to explain to her who I actually am,
Mm,
because living with her, it was like going through a layer of, okay, well, I have to hide my opinions because she might not like them.
mm,
And now it's like, oh, I can just like things and just not have to explain it. And not having her in my life for that, I think was helpful.
yeah. Well, there's like I mean, I don't want to assume anything, but there's like it sounds in the sort of way that when you have such a close relationship with someone like that, it's almost like I don't want to say it's like a captive thing, but it's almost like you have someone that's caring for you, and you sort of have this relationship where you're wholly dependent on another human. That it's got to be, especially someone that be your mom, which comes with its own set of issues. Anyone who has a mom,
Yeah.
I'm sure, is aware of that. But to have that, for your whole life, it's got to be difficult. It's also got to be kind of scary in a way, like if it's someone you're like, you don't want to upset the person that's looking after you, because
Right.
you need them to
Yeah.
care for you. So, um, yeah, that's got to be a very tough situation.
Yeah.
Um,
Even if our relationship was perfect, it still had that aspect of, but what if it isn't anymore? What if
yeah,
I mess up?
yeah,
And,
yeah.
yeah.
There'd be this weird underlying sort of fear that you would have your whole life, which would be, I imagine, pretty freeing once you're outside of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So is your mom and your dad still together?
No, they got divorced when I was 12.
Hmm. Do you have a relationship with your father?
Not anymore, no.
No.
It's also just easier.
Oh, that's fair. Um, Very cool. So when did you get the first stuff published? Like when did your first stuff that you've written get out there?
Um, so I actually got my first story accepted 3 months after I started submitting stories. Um, I don't remember how long it took for it to be published though. I want to say it was like about a year after that, because it was a podcast. They were like very far behind in production, and like I am very confused about the timeline actually. I might be thinking about two different stories. Definitely within a year or so of like 2016.
Hmm.
Mm.
Wow. And just that was a short story in a collection?
Yeah. Depending on which one was actually published first, it was either in an anthology of stories or grouped together with other stories on a podcast.
Okay. So how did you discover that? Was it just for like looks and solicitations online or?
Basically, yeah, there's a website called the Submission Grinder that you can put in, like, I have a science fiction story. It's 2,000 words long, and it will give you places that are open to stories like that.
Wow. I think I have a friend who uses that actually. I have a friend who's a writer and he had mentioned that too. I think something like that. Maybe that's it. I remember it sounds very familiar.
It's really helpful. It tells you how much they pay, how often, like how long it usually takes them to respond and everything.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Well, that's a crazy good research. Well, I guess that's great for any aspiring writers out there to check out as well.
yeah.
Um, so what was the first book? Was it the Jack Jet Stark's Intergalactic Freak Show?
That was my first novel that was like just mine.
Hmm.
Um, that length. Yeah.
And tell
Uh,
me about it. What's I am looking forward to reading it, but for the fans out there.
yeah. Um, so this was based on me watching the fourth season of the show Heroes and seeing that it was like superheroes and also carnivals, and like those are two of my favorite things. And I thought the only way this could be better is if it was in space. So I put it in space. And then I kind of got stuck at the idea of a traveling space carnival with genetically engineered performers who, like, when they hear a certain song, it triggers their genes to give them their powers. And that's where I got stuck. And then I heard the song American Pie, and the day the music died. And I thought, oh, what if the music stops one day? Why would it stop? What effect would it have? And somehow the song kept popping up every time I needed it. Like, my mom and I listened to the same radio station at the same times of day. There's no reason why I was hearing it more often. But for like 9 months writing this book, the first draft, I was hearing it once or twice a month.
Really, the Don MacLean song.
Yeah. And I was, the day that I ended up submitting my story or my book to the publisher who ended up accepting it, I later went back in my records and it was the day the music died. It was the day the plane crashed that Don MacLean wrote about.
Yeah. Wow.
And I, yeah.
That's insane.
And it kept showing up whenever I needed to take more inspiration from the lyrics. This is wild.
That is wild. I'm in a dinner theater right now, which is I do every year with the same group of people. And one of my character, it gets sung to by another character, and she sings the song "Hungry Eyes," which is like an '80s sort of
Yeah.
power ballad. And
No,
pardon?
not Hollow Notes. It's not Hollow Notes. That's Private Eyes.
Oh, that's Private Eyes.
Is it Eric Carmen?
Uh, Good. Let me see if you're not. Yes, it is. Very good. Hey, look at you. I didn't even know who sang it originally. But a woman sings it to me in the movie or in the play, and I've heard it on the radio. Like, I don't even listen to the radio that often, but I get in the car and turn it on before it connects to my phone. And it just keeps playing over and over. I just keep hearing it everywhere. I've heard it like 5 times in the last week. So maybe it's because I'm aware of it now and I wouldn't have been before, but it's weird how life hands you coincidences like that.
Yeah. And so when I got my final edits back on my book from my publisher, I had told my mom all about the song and everything. And I said, oh, well, you know what song is going to be on the radio next? And it wasn't. It was the second song on the radio that day.
Well, that's crazy. It's funny. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
assuming. Yeah, it's weird. Yeah, I like that sort of stuff. I don't really believe in anything supernatural or you know meanings or signs, but it's just weird how life
Mm.
sometimes coincidentally sends you that. Maybe it's just because you're more aware of it, but I do. I like to
Right.
romanticize the idea of some creative force that tries to push us in directions that we need to go.
Yeah.
So that's really
I call it doing for real life.
cool. That's awesome. And setting it in a carnival is a really fun, interesting take on that as well, especially Space Carnival, which is even more unique.
Yeah.
Do
And
you?
so if you know the song American Pie, you can kind of like notice a couple like things in my book that are based on that. Like like the main character is named Jack because of Jack Flash sat on a candlestick, so he
Mhm.
has fire breathing powers. Um, a lot of them are more obscure and ended up with me researching the history of the words. Like one of the characters is named Marullo, which is the Latin name for blackbird, like the Beatles song,
Mhm.
because Beatles, John Lennon are mentioned in American Pie,
Mhm.
like obliquely. So that was my life for like 9 months, was just researching these lyrics and figuring out how do I make them into a plot.
That's cool. I love that idea that you like zero in on. Um, I once heard somebody say, I don't know who it was. I feel like it was Rick Rubin or actually I think it was Phil Tippett, the writer who did or sorry, he's like the special effects artist that did like the a lot of stop motion animation stuff back in the day and does a lot of work in that field still. But he I think he said like if you want to eat good or you want to shit good, you got to eat good, which is like if you're gonna, if you want to create good work as an artist, you need to take in as much good work as you can. So the idea that,
Yeah,
I remember, I can't remember who it was, but someone was telling me how, I think like when Herman Melville wrote Moby Dick, he read like as many of the highest art books he could find at the same time as he was writing it. And that sort of all influenced the work. But yeah, I love the idea that just zeroing in on one particular art piece that sort of and using that germ as a sort of a kicking off point for the whole of your artistic endeavor. Super cool. It's a great idea.
yeah. I started researching more of Don MacLean songs after I already had the main plot of my story written.
Hmm.
And he has a song called Castles in the Air. One of the main cities in my story is a literal floating castle.
Wow, that's so cool.
I realized that, and it seems like I did it on purpose, but I didn't. And
Well,
yeah,
I couldn't name one other Don McLean song. I'm gonna have to go do some research, I
uh,
guess.
Vincent is my other favorite one.
Oh, I will listen to it. That's
It's
just
very sad about Vincent Van Gogh.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
Well, McLean seems to have an interest in the artistic types, I guess, obviously with a featuring on that. Oh, very cool. Is Van Gogh
types and artistic types and people who died tragically.
Yeah, I suppose so. But I guess as far as fiction goes, those, often those two things go hand in hand. Um,
Yeah.
was Van Gogh is Van Gogh an artist that you you appreciate generally, or is it just something that came to it through the Don McLean stuff?
And I don't really care that much about art, but
Hmm.
he is one of the artists that I can usually identify. Like
Mm,
if I see something, I know that it's his, and that makes my brain happy. So I like that more than I like other art.
I can understand that. I've always liked his paintings, but I went to that. They have this thing called like Van Gogh 360, where it's like you go into a huge room and they project this big thing all around you of all of his paintings, and they almost seem to come to life, like
Mm.
they move and stuff. It's
Oh, cool.
yeah, it's kind of an interesting way to experience it. Obviously he was a very troubled person in his life, but I assume you're a Doctor Who fan.
Yes.
Yeah, so I always think of that episode, and which is to me probably one of the last times I've actually physically cried while watching a TV show. Just because I think any artistic type can feel that, like they have this big. For those who may not know, there's this moment where Van Gogh is given the chance to see the impact his art has had on the world at large in the future. Like they bring him to the future and show him at a art museum, all the people appreciating his work, and he's just overcome with emotion, realizing that all the stuff he did had meaning and it means something to the world. And I'm even getting sad now thinking about it. Like it's just like as an artist, it's just it just hits you in that like center spot where you're like, oh my God, like it's actually touched someone, it's actually done something. And to see the success even after his death that came with his work, it was just such a heart rending sort of an event. So Van Gogh's always had a special place in my heart for that. And it's like not even, I love his work, but it's mostly just from an appearance on Doctor Who, which is kind of silly, but it's still, I
There's
guess.
a really good on Doctor Who though. To have a character show up for one episode and make you cry, that's
Yeah.
really good writing.
Oh, 100%. And that actor that played him is I don't know if he's Canadian, but he shows up in a lot of Canadian things. And he's a really good actor. Um,
Mhm.
but very cool. So you like the carnival aesthetic too, you said. Is that just because like where did that come from? Were you just always a fan of that sort of style or
It's just a thing that I like,
uh
and the freak show aspect of it.
Mhm.
Like freak shows historically were basically just ways to exhibit, like, hey, look at this weird disabled person.
Mhm.
But it was kind of good in a way too because it gave some disabled people a way to provide for themselves.
Mhm.
Where it's like it's not good that we're doing this, but I have a job kind of thing, and so that kind of like is important to me. Where I want it, I would rather the world not be like that, but sometimes it needs to be. But as long as you can do something, put yourself out there to show people that, like, yes, we exist. Please care about us now.
Yeah. I actually read a book not too long ago. It was called Zippy the Pinhead. It was about, or not Zippy the Pinhead, was that his name? There was a comic called Zippy the Pinhead that was loosely based on a real person that was in Carnival Freak shows. And I'm trying to think of but the guy that did that series did oh, that's what it is. It's called, yeah, that's what it is, Zippy the Pinhead. So he did a graphic novel called Nobody's Fool, which is about the life of this particular person who was involved. Schlitzie the Pinhead was the character's, like the actual, although his real name wasn't that, but that was what his name in the show was. And he was in the movie Freaks, the 1930. Do you ever watch that movie? The current, yeah.
Um, that's where it's like the one of us, one of
Yes, yeah,
us.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which I love that movie. And I just got the Criterion Blu-ray of it not too long ago because they finally put it out. But he is in it. He's one of the pinheads in it, and that that I read the book, which is just sort of about his life, and how he got bounced around to different people looking after him, and been different freak shows up until his death, and who cared for him, and man, it was really eye opening in that world because you're right, like it's like you don't want to accept that it's this world where the only people these ways some of these folks can provide for themselves is by being on display as freaks, but it also gave them a community and gave them money in a way to provide for themselves and their families. So
Mhm.
it's such a double-edged sword, I guess. Like you're happy that it always makes me happy to read these stories of these people sort of on the outsides of society that find solace, find community, find each other. But then, the other side of that is that it's all in a very gawky sort of sensationalist spectacle way. But it
Yeah.
was a very touching graphic novel. If you get a chance to read it, I'd suggest it. It's called
Yeah.
Nobody's Fool is the name of the book. But I just picked
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah, yeah. I just picked it up at a comic store in Moncton, I think, which is. But yeah, it's very, very cool and very interesting. And obviously, I was a big fan of that movie, so it's kind of neat to see the story of one of the people in it. But
Mhm.
that and American Horror Story had a season that was all called Freak Show, which is all about a freak show, which was very interesting as well, and took a lot of inspiration from that movie, which is something that always
Yeah.
sort of stuck with me. The new Del Toro movie as well, A Nightmare Alley, has a big carnival aspect to it as well, which is also very interesting. But yeah, I get what you're saying. That's it's interesting in that way. Like I can see why you like the life. It's problematic, but it's also something that was beneficial to a lot of people that who knows where life would have took them if it wasn't for that, right?
Yeah, it's like you don't think of carnivals as being part of like disabled culture,
Mm.
but it's part of our history. Like you wouldn't have that without us,
Mhm.
kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a lot of side gigs. One is I'm a professional wrestler as well. So, and
Mm.
that industry actually started in the carnival circuit as well. So,
Yeah.
it's interesting how much stuff has come out of those old sort of Barnum Bailey style
Yeah.
circus and carnival form. Cool. That's very, very cool. So are you a music person? Like you pulled Eric Carmen out pretty fast. I was like, that's impressive.
Um, so I mostly listen to music from before I was born because that's when my mother liked music from.
Hmm.
So anything from like the 60s through to the 80s and early 90s, I'm pretty good with.
Hmm.
Um, I had a reputation when I moved my group home for not knowing any modern music, and people would just play things to me, and they're like, "You've never heard of this?" And then one time there was a song, I forget what it was even. I think it was Avril Lavigne, and I started singing along, and they all looked at me like, "How did you know that?" And I said, "It's from 2004." They said, "How? Why that matter?" Because my mom's car didn't get the oldie station when in 2004. I know all the songs from that year,
Oh, that's
and
hilarious.
they thought I was cool for a second. Oh,
Aw.
you know, like you know it for a weird reason. Yeah.
That's very cool. Awesome. Well, I see you do a lot of, some activism work as well. Do you like how involved are you in that world?
Not a lot. Um, like I do try to like advocate for disability rights and gay rights and stuff, but it's not like my main thing. It's just like, hey, well, you're reading my story. By the way, look at this. It's an actual issue that you should care about. It's like try to make people care about it through fiction.
Hmm.
Um, but besides that, it's not a thing I try to dedicate a lot of time to. It just kind of happens naturally.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It feels like sometimes when people do work that, touches on these subjects, it feels like you almost have to become some kind of a public advocate for it just because when really normalizing it is kind of the intention, right? The idea that like, just saying, well, this is a character and this character is this way and this should be normal because it happens normally in life. People are normally of this orientation, normally have this disability instead of making it a sort of sensational aspect of it. But it seems like it kind of like you have to get on a soapbox when you do it, when really the
Mhm.
idea that it's just incidentally the character is this way because sometimes people are that way should be the intention, I guess, right? Like that's what it should be. It shouldn't be
Yeah,
a
that's one thing that I've been in the past 2 years. I've watched all of the episodes of Star Trek, like all the series,
Mhm.
and Star Trek Discovery does like representate like casual representation really well. Like there's a character there, use they them pronouns. We're going to have one scene about that, and then it's just a part of their character.
Hmm.
There's a guy in the wheelchair in the background. This is not about him. And I think that is important to do, where yes, we can do big important stories about it, but we don't have to.
Mhm.
And that you need to move towards that, where it's just, yeah, they're disabled. So that's not what they're about.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually need to catch up on that one. I think I've only watched the first two seasons, but I enjoyed them. Um,
Mm.
as well. But I noticed that you're advocating online for the Saving the Lower Deck show, which I'm definitely in support of.
Yeah.
Do they announce was the next season is the last one? Was the announcement?
Yeah. The fifth season is coming up is the last one.
Ah, that
And
sucks.
that show is a good show on its own. Like I think you could watch it without having ever seen a Star Trek and enjoy it. But when you know how much details they put into it, like tiny background characters have outfits that were in one episode of the original series. Like these people love Star Trek so much. Why can't we let them keep making Star Trek?
Yeah, I agree. I feel that way a little bit too about the Orville, the show that Seth MacFarlane made. I really, really dug that show, and it felt like classic Star Trek. And you could tell they really, obviously, with some more modern jokes and sensibilities in it. But as far as like the feeling and the vibe and the social commentary aspect, I really, really dug it. And Lower Decks does a really good job of that too. And it also does I feel like representation very well in different ways as well. Like some characters are this way, and it's not a big deal. It's just sort of, it's not like it's drawn a lot of attention to. It's just this is how they are, which
Yeah,
is
I watched
nice.
the and just like with Spaceballs, I watched the Orville before I really watched Star Trek.
Oh, really?
Um, I had seen most of Voyager and Next Generation as a teenager, but didn't really pay attention that much. Like I
Mhm.
wasn't like it was on. I wasn't obsessed with it.
Mhm.
So I really don't know how much the Orville was like referencing that. And I just realized that recently.
I think Next Generation mostly, which is one I've never actually watched all the way through. My Star Trek, the one I always love, and I do love Lower Decks for drawing a lot of attention to it, and even going back there was Deep Space Nine. That was my Star Trek. To me, it's the
Yeah.
best one, but I'm happy whoever anybody finds their Star Trek and enjoys it in their own way. That's great. But to me and my sensibilities, like I always like darker stuff that really
Yeah.
plays with emotions more and really goes into some the darker existentialist questions that life has to offer. And that show did a lot of that, which I really, really, really
Yeah.
dug.
Yeah. And Deep Space Nine had an episode about disability where I was actually happy at the end of it. It was Melora, the patient that Julian Bashir,
Right.
um, I think he ended up dating her too. Um, but she was disabled. She could cure herself, but it was more like scientific curiosity, almost like, hey, maybe we could cure this.
Hmm.
It wasn't her goal in life.
Yes.
And then she just decided, no, I'm fine like this. And, but we're not going to because we don't have to. You're
Yeah.
fine the way you are.
Yeah. That's a great message. I forgot about that episode. I always think about the one with when they reveal about who he is, like how he's been genetically altered by his parents because he was
Yeah.
slow as a kid and they didn't want him to be. So they had altered him genetically to make him a genius. And
Yeah.
the nature of when they bring him in to help other folks like him where the genetic alterations didn't necessarily make them uh like he's almost like a prime example of how this can help people where some of them because of the nature of their genetic alterations they're almost like have different tics or quirks or abnormalities in their personalities because of what was done to them when they were younger and they were explained on and that little group of people that they sort of bring him in with and sort of form a think tank with to help with the government or to help with the war like
Yeah.
that whole
That felt like a lot of like different types of autistic representation to me,
yeah.
where like Julian Bashir is the kind who can pass in society easily, but
Mm.
he thinks different.
Yeah.
And the are more along the lines of we can't really go out in society because we need so much support right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that them getting together and finding each other and helping each other I love that.
That's an awesome. Well, what's next for you? What do you have coming up? Any new projects, books, series that we can read?
A couple short stories that I don't know when any of them are coming out. I do have a short story coming out in the next edition of Brave New Girls, which is an anthology of it's middle grade science fiction with young girls in STEM. It's the fourth one I've been in. I think they've raised like several $1,000s for this. And my story is The Merchant of Venus.
Nice.
It is basically what I have done is skimmed the Wikipedia article about the Merchant of Venus or of Venice
Mm-hmm.
and took the parts that sounded interesting and then put it in space. It's a girl loopholes in the legal system because of her knowledge of astronomy and robots.
Well, that sounds awesome. There it is, my chat with Jen Rossman. Very great conversation. I was very happy to have that talk with them, and I'm very glad that they could make the time to talk with me. So thank you to Jen for being on the show, and I am very much enjoyed that talk. Like I said before, getting to know folks, getting to know their stories, where they come from, how they process, and they gave me a lot of insight into the artistic process. Actually, the fact that they sort of took the small germ of a Don MacLean song and made it and extracted so much from it in order to get a full book out of it was very interesting to me, and something that I feel like more maybe artistic types that are stuck should approach. Maybe find something that speaks to you. Maybe take it apart, take it right down to its core materials, to its bones, and then see what you can glean from it. That's not a way I've ever really thought of approaching an artistic project, but Jen certainly made me think about it a lot differently, which is great. So I'm excited to maybe use that approach myself in the future when it comes to some writing or some art of some kind. But big thanks to them for being on the show. It was a great chat. Next up, we have James Aquilone, I believe is how you pronounce it. It sounds like Aqualung to me, but I don't think that's right. I will have to ask him how to pronounce it properly, who is a creative force in comics as well, does a lot of really cool work, and I'm very excited to chat with. So that'll be next week's episode. But in the meantime, as I mentioned before, time is precious. It is a precious commodity. So I'm gonna go use mine to finish up some work and go to rehearsal and do all that stuff I gots to do. And but in the meantime, stay safe, have fun, go read some comics, tune in, like and subscribe if you haven't already. I mean, I don't really beat the drum too much on that, but I would love to get this podcast as many ears as possible. So please share it. Please tell friends about it. Please shout it from the rooftops. Get a bullhorn. If you know someone that's an air writer, get access to the plane and air write it across the sky. Graphic Histories Podcast. Tune in. And I appreciate your support and look forward to it continuing. So I will catch you guys all in 1 week's time.
The Graphic Histories Podcast is a proud partner of the United Federation of Podcasts.